One of my favorite things about the field of social work is just how diverse the field is. Every single social worker's day looks so different, but a way that we can kind of categorize that, learn more about the different roles of a social worker, is through micro, mezzo, and macro levels. All of these share the same core values and the same ethical system, but the job descriptions can look so different despite each of them being social workers. Hi, my name is Anna. If you want to learn more about my personal social work journey, check out the rest of my channel, but today we will be learning in depth about micro, mezzo, and macro social work. Before we get into the details, I want to thank today's sponsor, which is socialworkdegrees.org. Socialworkdegrees.org, powered by Wiley, is a comprehensive resource that will help you explore colleges and universities that offer the social work degree you are looking for. This means whether you want a bachelor's, a master's, a doctorate, whether you want to specialize in different areas of the field, if you're thinking you want an online degree versus an in-person degree, they have all the information you could ever need. If you are starting your career or if you're looking to advance your social work career, socialworkdegrees.org is where you can go to get all of the knowledge you need to achieve those professional goals. Take the next step in your social work career by visiting socialworkdegrees.org to learn more. And of course, it's linked down in the description. Starting with micro social work, this is what people tend to know social work as. Micro social work is social work that works with individuals and families directly. So this can look like case management. Typically, you need your Bachelor of Social Work, your BSW, to be a case manager. And case managers help clients secure housing, secure employment, secure healthcare, secure social services, or all of the above. They really use their familiarity with the systems in their area to help empower clients to access the resources that they need. This could look like a social worker working at a hospital, helping a client figure out the details of their discharge plan and how they can access services once they are no longer at the hospital. Micro social work can also look like clinical social work. This is what I personally really love. And clinical social work provides direct interventions to individuals and families. This can be in a school setting, in a substance abuse rehabilitation setting, in an inpatient clinic, in private therapy practice, a shelter for victims of domestic violence, correctional facility, the military, or there's many other options. Clinical social work can be kind of all over. But it specifically targets emotional, mental, and behavioral problems that clients face, and it really just helps enable and empower the clients to live the life that they are wanting to, free of those mental problems, emotional problems, behavioral problems, whatever it may be. So some skills that are crucially important in micro social work, obviously important throughout the whole field of social work, but so extra important in micro social work. Number one is empathy. All social workers, but specifically micro social workers, work with super intimate dilemmas in people's lives, and so it's so important to come into that area with empathy, with understanding, and with encouragement, rather than having any preconceived notions or preconceived judgments against the client. And this is something that's important considering whenever picking your specific area in the field, which population you want to work with, is knowing where your judgment lies. Because if you can't empathize with clients, then it's really hard to effectively do micro social work with them. Some other skills that are super important in micro social work are critical thinking, active listening, the ability to establish rapport, which just means being able to build a trusting relationship with a client, make them feel comfortable. And then on the flip side, but still so important, is also the ability to set personal boundaries. Because again, you're working so closely with clients, working so closely with intimate details of their life, but you have to be able to remember that they are a client, they're not my best friend. Zooming out from micro social work a little bit, the next level that we'll talk about is called mezzo social work. Mezzo social work, instead of working directly with individuals and families, tends to work more with groups and communities. Micro social workers facilitate working relationship within a community in order to clear the way for change. A role of a mezzo social worker could look like a group facilitator. Groups and support groups can serve so many purposes, but some might be a grief support group, a support group for people in recovery from substance abuse, a support group for people coping with chronic illness, for victims of crime, for those who have received mental health diagnoses, whether that's anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, whatever it may be, there can be a group that can be helpful to them. But groups sometimes could take the form that look more like classes. And mezzo social workers in this role could lead parenting skills classes for first-time parents or for young parents, personal finance classes for at-risk adolescents, independent living skill classes for young adult with disabilities, anger management classes for convicted offenders. While mezzo social work is still making a difference in an individual's life, it's doing it through the group setting, through the community setting. At the community level, mezzo social workers can be involved in community programs, so maybe an after-school program that provides tutoring and supervision to children after school. They can be involved in organizing community activism, whether that's working with the county school board or a city council. They can pave the way for change at a community level. And they can help manage community nonprofits. So maybe this nonprofit is aiming to increase accessibility to healthcare services for individuals within the community. Or maybe this mezzo social worker is running a community shelter for victims of domestic violence or unhoused populations. The main goal of mezzo social work, to really remember, is that they're trying to foster supportive relationships between individuals and the communities that they live in and they can create the structure and resources required to do that effectively. Some skills that are really important for mezzo social workers are articulate communication, creative problem solving, effective organization, whether that's organization of yourself or also being able to organize others, and strong flexibility. Moving on to macro social work. This one I feel like isn't talked about as much as the other two, but there are some really incredible macro social workers making really incredible change in our world, so they need to be talked about more. Macro social work is when you zoom out to the big picture and take that really large scale perspective. Macro social workers work in policy, they work in advocacy, they work in research, and their goals are to foster change that will then trickle down through society to affect those communities, those groups, those individuals, those families that the other social workers are working with, but they do so from kind of up top, where big change can be made to affect those individual lives. So by nature, just with the definition of macro social work, it often works very closely with governmental proceedings, whether that's legislation, whether that's budget, whatever that may be. But some specific roles of macro social workers could be a research coordinator. Research in social work can be investigative, really aiming to understand a social problem by determining the prevalence of the social problem, determining the specific population that the social problem affects, because effective solutions to social problems cannot be made if that social problem is not fully understood. So macro social workers take part in really being able to understand those social problems so that effective interventions can be made that then micro and mezzo social workers can utilize, can implement. So the other type of research, other than the investigative research, is also the effectiveness research. Any intervention that a social worker is using, whether that's a therapy intervention, a community intervention, a specific program that a social worker is using, the profession is evidence-based, meaning there needs to be evidence that shows the effectiveness of that intervention if social workers want to keep using it. And macro social work can really organize the efforts to test the effectiveness of different interventions to make sure that the work that all social workers are doing is actually beneficial. Another specific role of macro social workers is in policy. Social workers can analyze existing policy and suggest changes that need to be made in order to promote social justice, which is one of the core values of social work. They can also advocate for entirely new policy through organizing activist movements, drafting petitions, and participating in lobbying efforts. Macro social workers can create and direct large nonprofits. So different than community nonprofits, I'm meaning like the big foundations. And in this role, and with their background in social work, these macro social workers can promote to the dignity and worth of each individual person through directing funding, creating smaller programs, and paving the way for more research that will promote that dignity and worth of each individual person, even if they are not directly working one-on-one with those individuals. So while micro and also mezzo social work assesses, identifies, and intervenes with social problems and problems in individuals' lives, macro social work assesses, identifies, and intervenes with social problems in larger society as a whole. Some skills that are super important for macro social workers include networking, persuasiveness, passion, innovation, and definitely some dedication as well. But the cool thing about all three levels of social work, micro, mezzo, macro, is that they all three interact with each other. They are not just separate categories that live on their own. So even though a micro social worker who works with immigrant entrepreneurs who came to America and are now building a business may not work directly with a macro social worker who is serving as a consultant for immigration policy reform, their work is interconnected. The work of that macro social worker affecting policy, legislation, the narrative around immigrants directly affects the experiences of the families that micro social worker is working with. And the flip of that is that the experiences of those families and of those immigrants that the micro social worker is working with can inform the macro social worker on the changes that actually need to be made. So macro change trickles down to mezzo, which trickles down to micro, but also going the opposite direction, micro experiences inform mezzo interventions, which inform macro change. And just to show the interconnectedness further, each individual social worker will engage at all three of these levels at some point in your profession, no matter what your specialization in the field is. For example, a school social worker. Part of their day may be spent providing direct counseling to students, whether that student is suffering from anxiety, from depression, from grief, from problem behaviors. That direct clinical intervention, that direct clinical counseling is that social worker engaging in micro social work. But that same social worker in the same day may also work to develop a socio-emotional learning curriculum to be implemented in classrooms at the school, and that's mezzo social work at that classroom level. This same school social worker may also be advocating for policy change to state legislators for a policy that will benefit the students at their school, and that is macro level change. Another example, a criminal justice social worker. If you didn't know, I'm currently interning in a juvenile justice setting, so this one hits a little close to home. A criminal justice social worker may provide direct clinical counseling with evidence-based interventions to juvenile offenders suffering with mental health diagnoses. That is micro level social work. The same criminal justice social worker may facilitate a group for people who are detained who are suffering from substance abuse. That is meso level social work. And then this same criminal justice social worker may be leading a research project to test the effectiveness of a new intervention, and they may do that through grant writing to get funding and for actually developing a research research design, research proposal to test the effectiveness of that intervention. And that is macro level social work. Just another example, since I'm on a roll now, a hospital social worker, also a medical social worker, may provide direct clinical counseling to someone who just learned that they have a terminal illness. That's micro level social work. They may also facilitate a support group for caregivers of people with chronic illnesses or with traumatic brain injuries or whatever it may be. Support group. That's mezzo social work. And then the same medical social worker, hospital social worker, may be advocating to a large organization or to legislators for increased funding for the programs at their hospital. And that is macro level social work. So as you can tell, even though there are unique aspects of each of these levels of social work and unique skill sets needed to specialize in each of these levels of social work, and honestly, people with different interests are just going to be more interested in these different levels of social work. For example, I really love micro social work. That doesn't mean I have anything against mezzo and macro, and I still engage in mezzo and macro, but micro is where my heart lies. But there are others in my cohort who are solely macro. Like, macro level work is the reason they want to get into social work. And all of these levels are just so interconnected, interwoven together to really make up the profession as a whole. So people are needed at each level because change is needed at each level. Remember, my name is Anna. I'm currently an MSW student, so going through my journey of really learning the field of social work, getting to know the field of social work, and will be graduating soon to actually enter my career as a social worker. And I would love for you to subscribe if that is also interesting to you. Once again, thank you to socialworkdegrees.org for sponsoring this video. Remember, whether you are wanting to start your career in social work or wanting to further your career in social work, they are a comprehensive resource that provides you all the information you could ever want. All right, thank you. I love you. I'll see you next time.